learn to improve conversions and generate more leads with the video podcast at marketingoptimization.tv. Hi, and welcome to Marketing Optimization with Alex Designs. I'm your host, Alex Harris, and today we're chatting with Roger Dooley. How you doing, Roger?
Great, Alex. Great to be here.
Thanks for being here. Roger has a great podcast, if you haven't heard it, Brainfluence, and that's based on his book of the same name, Brainfluence. And he's a great author, speaker, and talks about using neuromarketing online, offline, and in direct marketing as well. To get started, Roger, what is your definition of optimization, and why is it beneficial?
Great. Well, I'll make one small correction. I invented the name of my book, and it's Brainfluence, one word. So it skips the I, and it rendered it absolutely untranslatable into other languages. When now it's in, I think, like 7 different languages, and some of the translations are things like mind control and other kind of fascinating interpretations of it. So it's great for SEO to create your own word. You'll definitely rank for it if you invented it. But for translations, maybe not so good. So anyway, back to optimization. I look at optimization, I guess, in a holistic sense. I've been an entrepreneur for years, and even before the internet, I was doing direct marketing. We mailed hundreds of thousands of catalogs to people, and that was sort of a precursor to the digital marketing of today, because we could actually do A/B tests. We could do square inch analysis, that is, calculate the contribution of different products by the how much space we gave them in the catalog. So it was a very quantitative kind of marketing, and that sort of naturally flowed into an interest in sort of a scientific approach to marketing on the web. I guess I came into the conversion space from a different angle. I started writing about using brain and behavior research in marketing back, more than 10 years ago now. And what I found was over time, although some of the initial focus was on sort of big brand type activities using fMRI or EEG studies to evaluate advertising's effectiveness. I found the stuff that was getting the most interest from my readers, most of whom could not afford to do a brain scan themselves, was the use of behavior research to improve their marketing and their business efforts. And ultimately that flowed into a pretty strong interest in conversion, and specifically using these techniques to develop hypotheses that can then be tested.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoy your podcast, and I listen to the book as well. And what I really like about your approach is that what I'm envious about is how you break things down into the simplest form. I guess it's maybe in your background. I don't know if you were a teacher or anything in the past, but the way you make things in your book, you picked out some of the most famous books, Robert Cialdini, Dan Ariely, some of the best books out there, and then you broke them down into meaningful aspects of how you can use that marketing. And that's some of the things I'd like to talk about today. When you start the book, you talk about appealing to your customer's brain using smarter marketing, understanding how your customer brains work to get better results with less money. And I want to talk about some of those things that people can use in their own online marketing. So the majority of people listening, they test their own WordPress sites or their clients, e-commerce or SaaS products. And in your book, you talk about 100 ways to persuade and convince consumers with neuromarketing. Before we jump into some of those 100, and we can talk about specifically, I want to talk about the mindset. These are new things that I'm learning, and so I like to ask more smarter people than me specific questions. Let's talk about cognitive fluency and how does that work with user experience design?
Sure. And let me back up. The reason that working with your customer's brain is important is because so often as marketers, we focus on the things that we think are important to the customer. In other words, the features of our product or our service. hopefully the benefits that those will provide the customers. We think about pricing a lot, which of course is an important factor. But when we focus only on those things, we're actually focusing on a very small part of our customers' decision-making process. Neuroscientists say that 95% of our decision-making processes are non-conscious. In other words, not the sort of rational list of features and benefits and so on that we might think of as being the way a customer makes a decision, where we're weighing two alternatives or multiple alternatives. And instead, a huge amount of the process is non-conscious. It's emotional. It's driven by past experience, by sort of rules that our brain has developed and so on. So that's why looking at the sort of brainy side of what you're doing is so important. And cognitive fluency it sounds complicated, but it's really a rather a simple concept, although it really has some startling implications for marketers. Cognitive fluency refers to how easily our brains process information. And as you might expect, things that are processed more easily tend to be more desirable and so on. But there are some subtle effects that really blow people's minds. One of the best examples of cognitive fluency that I've seen was a study from the University of Minnesota that had people read just two sentences that described a series of exercises that involved leaning your chin forward and pricking your neck up and so on, and repeating it 6 to 10 times. And half the people read the description of the exercise in Arial, which is a simple sans serif font, very easy to read. And the other half of the subjects read the exact same words in the exact same size, type, and so on in a brushy font. And that was sort of a chunkier font that is supposed to look a little bit like brush strokes. Totally legible. I mean, you would have absolutely no difficulty reading it, but it's not quite as easy to read as Arial. And then they asked all of the subjects, how long do you think these exercises will take? The Arial folks, with the simple font, estimated it would take about 8 minutes, where the other group estimated it would be more than 15 minutes. So almost twice as long an estimate for the people who read it in brushy. Now, again, the text was the same. Everything was the same. So you can imagine that if you are asking a visitor to your website to do something, say fill out a form, you don't want to let your designer choose that really cool font. Rather, you want to be sure that if you want to minimize how long a customer thinks something is going to take, you want to present it as simply as possible.
Yeah, I mean, these are all kind of new things that I always, understood, cognitive load and, visual hierarchy and storytelling. But, putting all these things together is really, something I've done for years. I just never, labeled it that I was actually doing these things. So everybody that I interview, I'm just so amazed that there's actually scientific data that backs up why you should be doing certain things.
You were on the right track all along.
Yeah,
but I found that to be true. And occasionally, when you get some, say, a brain scan study in that shows something, people say, well, we already knew that. And that's true because it had been determined either by experience or by other kinds of experiments. But sometimes that additional data helps you understand why it works. It helps you use that technique more effectively in the future.
Yeah. Well, I'm really impressed with your approach because, as you mention certain things, you're always backing up with data. And I think that's actually one of my faults. I actually don't do that enough. I don't research as much as I probably should, what everyone else is doing to get, real proven scientific data. Now, let's talk about, using that advertising psychology to, neuromarketing and how it applies to conversion rate optimization. You did mention, price and how people are affected by price. One of the things that you talk about in the book, and people always ask me about price testing. Now, you talk about anchoring price. Let's just give a brief overview and start there.
Well, there are several ways you can anchor a price, and this isn't a technique that's used a lot by infomercials, and everybody can relate to that, where they start off by describing this amazing product and all that it'll do for you, and that it's a $499 product. That sets the anchor there at $499, and then as it goes on, they start sort of adjusting the pitch and saying, if you can take advantage of this special offer for the next 24 hours, we're selling it for $299. And now you're thinking, oh, okay, that's a $500 product that I can get for $300. And so that's one way of setting an anchor. You can also set an anchor, and if these days you see a lot of software companies online that may be offering software as a service, and they'll almost always have, say, 3 or 4 levels of service, maybe a freemium that has very limited features, a sort of a pro package, and then an ultimate package that is a lot more expensive. And if they're smart, rather than starting at the bottom and working up, they'll start at the top and work down, because that sort of ultimate package sets a very high anchor price, and it positions the pro package, which is the one they really want to sell you, as a much more reasonable alternative. And one of the quirkier things that Dan Ariely found in an experiment was that you could create anchors that are based on absolutely nothing. I mean, the price anchoring is all pretty logical. We understand that, and that's why, for instance, these days you've got all these Black Friday sales that we just went through that, they give you a price and it's 50% off this weekend only. And whether that original list price has any meaning at all, who knows? But they try and use that as an anchoring technique too, that, this is a $100 pair of slacks that you can get for $50 today. So, but what Ariely found was that in one experiment, he had each person, each subject in the group write down the last 2 digits of their Social Security number, which is in essence a random number assigned to each person. Then each person was asked to price a computer keyboard, which is something that most people don't really know how much it costs. You rarely buy a computer keyboard, and there's a lot of variation in quality and everything else. So if somebody shows you a picture of a computer keyboard, you're probably not going to really know what it's worth. And what he found was that there was a huge correlation between the last 2 digits of the Social Security number of the person, which they had been just forced to write down, and their price estimate of the keyboard. People who were in the lowest range from 0 to 20 as the last 2 digits estimated very low value, I think below $20 for the keyboard, where the very highest group was about 4 times that much. So the introducing this totally random number influenced the value perception of the product for those people.
Wow. Yeah. Now, that's really interesting, and it's kind of like what I'm trying to determine. I'm building some landing page for a client. I'm trying to figure out what are the pains and problems and the psychology of the customer who are visiting, and it's almost hard to get that data. It's like you obviously you can't pull out a rabbit out of a hat and get the magic answer for every customer. So how do you kind of determine what's going on in the customer's mind? What tools have you used in the past?
Well, I think it's particularly relevant because we have a conversion optimization audience here. But the important thing, I think, is to start with a hypothesis based on one of these ideas and then test it. And there's obviously a lot of tools out there. You probably know a lot of more than I do, things like Optimizely and so on, that lets you very easily set up different tests. But I would never recommend that somebody take one of these ideas based on psychology or neuroscience and blindly assume that it will work in their business for their product or for their service. I think that all of this data was originally developed by experimentation, and that needs to carry through to the final business decision. And certainly, if you look at optimization experiments that folks have carried out over time, there's never a single answer. For a while, I was like, oh, wow, make your action button orange because that orange converts best. But then they ran some more tests and, well, gee, on these sites, orange doesn't convert as well as green. And if your site has an orange theme, probably a green or blue button is going to convert better than orange because of contrast. So every idea should be tested.
Yeah, there's definitely a number of ways that you can do it. I know from me perspective, I'm always gathering this qualitative data, and some of the tools that we do use are usertesting.com, where we watch our specific target audience go through the actual sites, and then eventually we'll start to see patterns of what information is actually missing. So we start to get into the mind of the customer that way. Also using SurveyMonkey, actual feedback and surveys, and then also Qualaroo, the actual in-page surveys based on the intent of what they're actually doing. Now, continue with pricing. Forever, I've basically been doing direct marketing myself for a while as well, but I've never known the reason of why, the price is always like $4.99 versus $500. Is there a specific reason for that, or some scientific data to back up why you should be using like the 99?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of research on pricing, and some of it is a bit contradictory. If you take one approach, you might find yourself sort of violating another approach, and that's why testing is important to see what works in any given situation. But a couple of the key principles are, I think that first of all, is pricing precision. One set of experiments had people estimate what they thought a product was worth, and the product was labeled with one of three prices, one of which was about exactly $500, and the others were either just a little bit below, like $498.20 or $503.75. And in each case, they were asked, what do you think the real value of this product is? When the product was priced at the even 500, people estimated a pretty low value. They thought it was really worth $400. But with both of the more exact prices, it didn't matter whether it was higher or lower than the $500, since it was only a matter of a very small amount. They estimated that the price was about $485, so much, much closer to the real price. And the conclusion you can draw from that is that precise prices are more credible. So that's one effect. Now, there's another weird effect that showed people a price that was as abbreviated as possible. For instance, if it was $1,100.99 or $1,199.99, it would be just 1199. And then another added punctuation and decimals to it. So it would be 1,199 decimal 00. And they found that people estimated that their perception was that the price with the punctuation and decimal places was a higher price than the other one. And this kind of perplexed the scientists because, of course, the prices were absolutely identical. And through a series of experiments, they determined that unknowingly, the customers were sort of sounding out the price in their brain. And they weren't consciously doing this, but the higher the number of syllables, that made it seem like a bigger price and hence a higher price. So that kind of works against the precision thing, which is why I say test. I know that for years, Sears and Roebuck, who was one of the earliest direct marketers and a huge user of testing, even back in the pre-digital days, almost always ended their prices in 97. That was what they found worked for them. And again, 7 is a 2-syllable number. So that kind of works against the syllable thing, but apparently, at least for a lot of years, it worked for them. But I am a believer in the first effect being precision. So I would kind of steer clear of a big round number because it's going to seem more like you just came up with that number as opposed to something that you carefully determined after evaluating the cost and the value and so on.
Well, yeah, I think precision is definitely important. Obviously, when you're selling anything, you're selling it online or you're selling it, on the phone or in person to someone. You have to be confident with your pricing. So being precise and backing up the reasons of why you're charging a certain thing, I definitely agree with that. Now, let's move on to maybe like design and the visual elements of it. I think you mentioned a couple things there. The long price with the decimal points, that looks like a bigger number. And I think it comes into visualization and design, visual hierarchy. When you're looking at a page, especially coming off of pay-per-click advertising or, the things that we talk about on the show, you only have a couple seconds to interpret that page. You only have, 1 to 2 seconds to make that first impression. And they're literally just going and scanning through that page. And if they can understand, the visual hierarchy, the value proposition, the call to action, and interpret that pricing within just a few seconds, then you kind of have less friction and not make people think. Mm-hmm. Now, in your brand, in your book, you talk about brains love brands.
That's my brand too, so it's okay.
Brains love brands they know. And I love that line because it's all about, social proof and credibility and authority and the ability to like scan across a page, use the right photography. Let's talk a little bit about that. Brains love brands they know.
Right. Well, before we even get to the brand thing, I think that you brought up an important point about how quickly people evaluate a page. And actually, a second or two is kind of high. Mm-hmm. There's research showing that it happens in much less than a full second, which means before people have had a chance to process anything. Mm-hmm. They haven't processed the images, the headline, the text, or anything else. It's that first impression. So having a good design that comes across as being both professional and appropriate for whatever you're selling is really important, because before people read anything or look at your pretty picture, they'll have decided something about that site and whether they like it or not. Yeah. And it's a huge predictor of their future behavior. So that's really important. Now, the brand thing is interesting. The research that demonstrates the power of brands that people know expose people to familiar brands and then ones that were just invented brands. And they found a huge difference in the way people's brain responded. And this was conducted using fMRI, which actually gives you a more or less real-time 3D visualization of brain activity. Mm-hmm. And brands that people were familiar with lit up the reward center in their brain, where the unfamiliar brands actually sort of triggered like a mild disgust reaction. And that doesn't mean that people are totally disgusted by these unfamiliar names, but it was just a different kind of response in their brains to similar names, but ones that they weren't familiar with. Mm-hmm. So that's why brands need to keep repeating their exposures. And I've always felt that even these sort of subliminal exposures, if you go to an airport and perhaps Samsung sponsored the luggage carts, you're probably not processing that as being a Samsung ad unless you're really bored there waiting for your bags to come off the conveyor. But you just get those, dozens of little brand impressions there in a short space of time, and repeat that over a period of months and years and so on. Mm-hmm. And that brand will be really embedded in your brain.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally understand where you're coming from. I know here in South Florida, when you go and you arrive at the airport, there's always like these little, commercials going on related to, the dolphins or something like that. And, you don't even interpret them. But after a while coming back and forth, they're like, oh, wow, maybe I will watch that football game tonight or whatever it is. And I think you could do the same thing online, as people visit your landing pages or your particular pages, using those media logos that people recognize. It just instantly creates that credibility, using thought leaders or influencers, testimonials, easily scannable. People can recognize it. Because what did Cialdini say? People like to work with people that they like, as I said. So, the more that you can relate to them and create some empathy, that you're in the right place for them, then that can help convince a conversion.
Right, and you've also got authority at work for you there. So if you've got an endorsement from somebody who is well known, then that plays into one of Cialdini's other principles, which is authority, that people respect authority and they're more likely to be persuaded when authority is involved.
Very cool. Yeah, that ties into the attention and consciousness that you talk about in the book, and then how the similarities between magicians and marketers. We're trying all these different things, sleight of hand with our marketing in a certain way.
Right, and the interesting thing about attention is that people are processing more than they think. So. They may be focused on one part of your webpage, then perhaps they're reading the text on it or the headline. But if there's an image off to the side, there's a good chance that their brain is processing that too. And there have been certainly plenty of experiments showing that people are influenced by ads that they don't remember seeing, by elements that they don't consciously recall. So there's even low attention and no attention branding really happens.
Yeah, and this would play into your retargeting campaigns online. Having people, those ads follow you around to Amazon, Google, Facebook, YouTube, and so forth. Awesome. So some really great information right there. It's so much stuff to really test. The ability to test pricing, test photography related to getting people to empathize with you. So showing brands that are recognizable, and then improving your attention and consciousness. Before we wrap up, let's tell people specifically about your book, your podcast, and where people can find out more about you.
Well, probably the best starting point is rogerdooley.com. That's where the podcast lives, and you'll find links to my Neuromarketing blog that's at neurosciencemarketing.com, and my Forbes blog there as well. And so start at rogerdooley.com, and you'll be able to find all my other stuff.
Excellent. Roger, what would be one thing that optimizers can do to use neuromarketing to really improve their business and their conversion rates?
Boy, I think the not to give a vague answer to that, but sort of an overarching answer is to for a while, put aside features and benefits and read some of the literature, not just my book, but read Cialdini's books. Influence, Psychology of Persuasion is his big one that talks about his 6 principles. Dan Ariely's Predictably Irrational. It isn't really a business book per se, but it gives you some real interesting insights into human behavior. And some of the other books on the topic. There's a book about pricing by Lee Caldwell that's The Psychology of Price. And so there are so many books on the topic. Obviously, people don't have time to read everything, but read some things and start focusing on more of the non-conscious aspects of marketing to your customers in coming up with tests. And I think that will pay big dividends down the road.
Yeah, I think it's amazing to understand how much more that you can understand about your customers. You can anticipate their click-throughs. You can anticipate where they're going to go on your site, and then you can create custom marketing personalized to whatever experiences that you want to actually give them. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thanks a lot for your time today, Roger.
Well, thank you, Alex. It's been fun.
Thank you for watching the Marketing Optimization Podcast with Alex Designs. Please remember to subscribe to all of the videos in my YouTube channel. Thank you.